Welcome back everybody. Now BMW recently announced their new and updated R1300GS with a whole host of big changes that give it more power and torque, less weight and bags more tech. And so it's obviously a big leap forward in many regards, but the question is, are these new features enough to cement its place as the bestseller in the large capacity adventure bike market? Well, in my opinion, the current benchmark in this category for the most advanced performance and features has to be the Ducati Multistrada V4. And so in this video, we'll put them head to head in each of the key categories, score the bikes against each other, and then at the end, declare a winner. So first up, let's start with that headline power figure. And whilst the R1300GS has taken a bit of a hike up this year owing to that new increased capacity versus the previous Gen 1250, it's still not quite enough to compete with the Multistrada's V4, which to be fair has ultimately trickled down from their MotoGP program. So the GS now makes 145 horsepower at 7,750 RPM, which granted is a decent improvement on the 136 horses of the previous generation, but the Multistrada absolutely blows it out of the water, making 170 horses peak, owing to the extra revs up at 10,500 RPM. It's a super lively engine, this V4, always lots of fun to ride, and so for this one, the point has to go to the Ducati. I'd also say the soundtrack massively contributes to the riding experience, and whilst it's not a classic V4 sound, Ducati's V4s use what they call a twin pulse firing order to give them more of the character of a V-twin. You know, it's still a lot more exciting for the ears than the smoother, almost dull drone of the Boxer twin. Maybe for the true BMW aficionado, it's actually quite appealing. But to my ears, it's just a bit flat with those even firing intervals, and it doesn't make half of the visceral roar that you get with a twin or a V4. So again, the point here has to go to the Multi. But for me, where the GS, at least the 1250 in my experience, always claws it back, is with that rich and usable mid-range torque. And the 1300 GS again ought to be even better with that bigger engine, so more torque. And it's now making 149 Nm peak, which is made at 6,500 RPM, and that's 6 Nm up on the previous gen. So not only is that way more punch than the 125 Nm of the Ducati, but it makes it much lower in the rev range, which makes it a lot easier to access. In fact, I think I'm right in saying it's the torquiest adventure bike you can currently buy, and it makes it lower in the rev range than any other bike on the market. Now this means excellent real-world acceleration without having to absolutely wring its neck, and also lots of chugging power down low for off-roading or touring and carrying a passenger and luggage. So the points here have to go to the GS. I think I'll also give it a big tick for the smoothness that you get out of this engine. Those even firing intervals that I moaned about in the sound stakes actually give it a super smooth delivery and feel, which means it just sort of fades into the background on longer rides with minimal vibes through the pegs and the bars and the seat. I think it's just such a big factor in what makes this bike excellent for covering distance, and while the Ducati is still pretty refined, you've got to say after 5 or 6 hours in the saddle, you probably want to be on the Boxer. The new 1300 Boxer Twin also still packs their excellent shift cam tech, which is BMW's name for variable valve timing and lift. Basically, you got two different intake cams. One is more torquey and fuel efficient in the lower revs, but then when the engine starts singing a bit, it shifts over to the other cam profile, which gives you more top-end power. This is one of the factors that gives it, quite frankly, excellent fuel economy figures, with BMW claiming just 4.8 litres of fuel consumed per 100 kilometers on this new version. Again, I think that makes it the most fuel-efficient bike on the large capacity adventure market, and it absolutely trounces what, it has to be said, is a very thirsty engine over on the Ducati. Even with the 19-litre fuel tank on the GS now, as opposed to the 20 of the previous gen, you're getting about 396 kilometers of range or 246 miles according to those official consumption figures. The Multi V4 on the other hand, well, even with its much bigger tank at 22 litres, so that's an extra 3 litres, you know, it's still way down at 314 kilometers or 195 miles, and and that's because it absolutely chugs fuel at 7 litres per 100 kilometers. So points here again to the GS. Now before we get onto the next category, I just want to say a massive thanks to Quadlock for sponsoring this video. Mounting your phone on the bars is the quickest and easiest way to add navigation to your bike, and for me, Quadlock make the best motorcycle phone mounts in the business. Now on my personal bike, I use a range of their products, so I've got their Handlebar Mount Pro, which is CNC aluminium and looks super premium. I use their vibration dampener, which helps to protect your phone's camera from those unwanted harmful vibes. There's a wireless charging head, so if your phone is wireless charging compatible, you don't need to worry about keeping it juiced up. And also you can run that to your battery with their smart power system, which will deliver the power but also switch off when the bike's not running to make sure it doesn't drain your battery. Plus, they've got a whole ecosystem of other great mounts, so things like desk mounts, car mounts, bicycle mounts, and armbands for when you go out running. And so you should be able to find a mounting solution to suit your specific needs. Genuinely, I love Quadlock products, and you'll find a link in the description to their website where you can find them all. And down there, you'll also find a discount code specifically for my viewers. So once again, a massive thanks to Quadlock for their support. And with that, back to the bikes. Onto the chassis, and the Multi V4 isn't bad at all on weight. The standard version comes in at 240 kilograms wet, whereas the S model tips the scales at 243 owing to some extra kit like the semi-active electronic suspension. Far lighter, in fact, than the old 1250GS, but this new 1300 model has been put on a big diet with a new engine, new shaft drive system, a new sheet steel frame and aluminium subframe, and a lithium-ion battery, and all those factors combined to bring it in at 237 kilograms curb. Then you've got the fact that it carries its weight exceptionally low with that boxer twin configuration, and so I think the points here can only go to the GS. Now, adventure bikes have to be absolute all-rounders when it comes to suspension. They've got to be firm enough to do some sporty riding, cushy enough to tour in comfort, and also tall enough to soak up some decent bumps off-road. So for me, this is the perfect application of electronically adjustable semi-active suspension, which you can typically dial in through the switchgear and dash without having to stop and get tools out, and the damping is constantly adjusted in real time to perfectly suit the current riding conditions. So thankfully, both bikes do offer it, although you'll have to pay a little bit more. On the Ducati, it's the S model, which gets their excellent Skyhook system, or on the BMW, you'll need to upgrade to their dynamic ESA system, but I think both deliver largely comparable features. There's similar amounts of adjustability, they're tied into the riding modes, and also both get adaptive ride height where the bike lowers when you come to a standstill, just to make it a little bit easier to get both feet down. But the thing is, for me, the GS fundamentally has one big advantage, and that's the telelever front end. As opposed to a regular telescopic fork, this one uses a wishbone and monoshock, and it gives the GS this super comfortable ride quality, and it always feels planted and stable. Plus, it helps to eliminate fork dive mechanically as opposed to relying on the electronic suspension to whack up the damping when you get on the brakes. It's one of the key defining features of the GS riding experience, and while the Multistrada does probably feel more direct and sporty, I just think it makes the GS hard to beat for versatility and also distance riding, and so for this one, points to the BMW. Now onto the brakes, and on the standard Multi V4 you get a pair of decent 4-piston radially mounted monoblock Brembo calipers up front on 320mm discs, or if you go for the S model you get their top spec Superbike standard Stylema calipers on even larger 330mm discs. Both bikes get a Brembo radial master cylinder to match, and in my experience this braking setup is more than capable of bringing the Multi V4 to a stop, and it's got plenty of feel through the lever. Now the BMW gets their own branded hardware. I believe it's made on their behalf by Hayes in the US, and they're a similar spec, 4-piston, radially mounted on slightly smaller 310mm discs, and then you've got the option to upgrade to their sports brake, which uses an improved piston design, they say, for more stopping power, but also a bit of a different finish, which it has to be said looks a little bit Brembo. Honestly, they look pretty much on a par from a specs perspective, and so I'll have to call this one evens. Onto the wheels, and there's a 19-incher up front on on each of these bikes, and that gives them a decent balance between on and off-road ability. And whilst the standard wheels are cast aluminium on both bikes, there's also a tubular spoke wheel set available as an upgrade to give them more strength for off-road riding. 455 quid on the BMW or 700 quid on the Ducati. There is one slight advantage for the BMW though, and that's the new option, which is their forged enduro wheels, and they say it's a bit of a balance between the two, so lighter than the spoke wheels, but also still stronger than the regular cast aluminium. And so for this category, for the extra option and also the lower price on the spokes, I'm gonna give this one again to the GS. Ergonomically, one of the things that's super impressive about the Multistrada V4 is the sheer range of seat heights achievable with the combination of seats, the two seat height settings, and also their suspension lowering kit. So using various combos, 810mm, 830, 848, 55, 860 and 875 are all possible. So there should be something for riders of all different statures, and of course you've got that minimum preload feature to help a little at a standstill. Now with this new GS, I think you've got 3 seat heights from what I can tell. So the standard seat is at 850, a low seat brings it down to 830mm, and then there's a high seat which I think is 870. And while it does get the adaptive ride height as well, so that takes another 30mm off when you're riding slow or stopped, ultimately from what I can tell there's less of a range of options. The rest of the rider triangle looks pretty similar though, so I think I'll give the point here to the Multi just for that versatility. Now, previous to the 1300GS, I think I would have said the Multi V4 was the market leader for tech, with all the rider aids and modes you could ever wish for, a great TFT dash with connectivity features, and a front and rear facing radar system with active cruise control and blind spot warnings. But the new GS I think matches it in almost every regard now, and it also gets the option of front and rear radars. That's opened up some of the same features, so active cruise control and blind spot warnings, but BMW's ride assistance system does seem a little bit more advanced because it gets front collision warnings too, and it can even intervene with the brakes if it thinks necessary. So I think the tech category goes to the GS. Now looks wise, this new 1300 has massively split opinion in the comments on my videos, with some of you seeming to really like it, whilst others say it looks a bit too much like a Honda NC750. Personally, I'm somewhere in between. I will acknowledge that it's not quite as tough looking as the previous gen, but I do like that they've been quite bold with it, and also I'd say some of the aesthetics are a product of like good practical enhancements. That thin tail section, for example, is because it's got a lighter, stiffer aluminium subframe, and also on that new front end they've had to accommodate the front facing radar, and that probably wouldn't have been possible with the old asymmetrical headlight design. But come on, you can't really beat Ducati at the old styling game. The Multistrada V4 is a fantastic looking bike, and for me I think it'd have to be in the aviator grey with the pop of red on the subframe, spec with the spoke wheels and the aluminium luggage. That for me is a great looking adventure bike, perhaps a little bit less challenging and modern than the GS, but it just seems to flow better. So style points, no big surprise here, go to the Ducati. On to price, and the base GS starts at £15,990, which is about £1,000 less than the equivalent Multistrada V4. The TE model, which gets the better brakes and the improved suspension with the electronic adjustability, plus a whole bunch of other extras, well that one starts at £18,465, and I think it's fair to say that that's pretty much comparable to the Multistrada V4S. The price gap here though, well as you go up the spec, it starts to widen. It's over £2,000 now, so that's £20,495. On the face of it, it looks like the BMW's better value, and so it gets the point, although to be fair, Ducatis have never really been about low pricing. That makes it 8 points to the GS, 4 to the Multistrada V4. But as always, I'd love to know what you think down in the comments below and which bike you'd pick. Obviously, this scoring is a bit more of an art than a science, and so I'd absolutely love to know your take. Also, if you want to see my review of the latest iteration of the fantastic Multistrada V4, then here's my video all about the new Grand Tour version, which you can give it a click and give it a watch. I rode that out in Italy earlier this month. Also, do hit subscribe if you haven't already, if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news, reviews and comparisons right here on YouTube. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next one.